Some repeaters are great in Red Dead Online and some are just a waste of money. I've tested them all and spoiler, even experienced players will be surprised to see which repeater turned out to be the worst in the game. Let's begin with the damage. Pretty close distance, less than 10 steps, and I'm gonna be using express ammo for all repeaters. All the weapons have maximum familiarity and obviously I'm cleaning them before each test. Body shots, now you've seen a result for Lancaster repeater. Testing Litchfield now, as you can see damage is higher. Now Evans repeater, and the last one is Carbine repeater. As you can see, Litchfield has the highest damage, Lancaster is on a second place, then Evans and then Carbine. Now when you fight in NPCs, it's gonna be the damage on any distance, because there is no damage reduction in PvE. But in PvP, when you fight in other players, damage drops significantly with distance. And here something interesting happens, because around lock-on range, Lancaster and Evans have higher damage than Litchfield repeater. It doesn't really matter because damage is pathetic, and especially with repeaters you don't want to go for body shots in PvP or even in PvE, but it's worth noticing that Litchfield has the highest damage only on a close or middle range. Now next is a headshot damage, and this one is quite interesting, because first of all, range from which headshots are making a one-shot kill is relatively small, and it's the same for all repeaters. By the way, I'm talking only about PvP, because in PvE all repeaters are killing most enemies from any distance with one headshot. Anyway, second weird thing is that on bigger distances all repeaters have the same headshot damage. Like take a look, Lancaster and Litchfield repeater. On such range, Litchfield has around 25% higher body shot damage, but headshot damage is exactly the same. And that's an extremely important thing to know, because as I've already said, in PvP you have to go for headshots with repeaters. And if all repeaters have the same headshot range and headshot damage, then you should care about other parameters like fire rate or accuracy. Let's begin with accuracy, because it might sound weird, but it's less important parameter than a fire rate. Now when you stand in still and aiming for sometimes, all repeaters will have the same bloom size. But when you strafing, like moving from side to side or shooting, bloom size increases. Also, it takes some time after initial aim to reach this minimum bloom size, and this time is different for different weapons. Anyway, the most important parameter on practice here, in my opinion, is a bloom size while you moving, and here all repeaters are pretty much the same except Litchfield, which has much higher bloom size while moving and also a much higher bloom size after recoil, and it takes most time for Litchfield to reach minimum bloom size as well. So if we're talking about bloom size or bloom shrink speed, Litchfield is by far the worst choice and Lancaster is the best, but on practice it doesn't really matter, because you want to use painted black ability cards with your repeaters, and painted black gives you perfect accuracy, so bloom size or bloom shrink speed is irrelevant. However, if you're not using painted black for some reason, for example in a hardcore PvP series, it will be much harder to shot anyone with Litchfield than with Lancaster. You will definitely see a difference here. Anyway, the most important parameter for painted black and headshots will be fire rate, and since all repeaters have different ammo capacity, I've calculated how much time it takes per each shot. And by the way, ammo capacity is also kinda important, mostly for PvE, and here Evans is definitely the best choice because it has 26 bullets. Litchfield and Lancaster are pretty much the same, and Carbine repeater is definitely worst with only 7 bullets, but as you will see later, it's compensated by the high reload speed. Anyway, Lancaster and Carbine repeaters are the fastest with pretty much the same result. Litchfield is the worst again, and Evans is somewhere in between. If we're talking about hip fire rate, which is different, here Lancaster is the best again, but which is kinda weird, Carbine repeater is the slowest one. Now reload speed. To fully reload Carbine repeater it takes only 1.5 seconds, because you fully reload this weapon, not bullet by bullet like with other repeaters. And actually it makes Carbine repeater the only repeater that you want to reload on practice, because even with Lancaster repeater, which is the second fastest. When you're running out of bullets, you just want to switch weapon, because it will take more than 4 seconds to fully reload it, and it's just too much time. Next important parameter is range, from which you can mark your targets with help of Painted Black ability card. And here all repeaters have exactly the same range, more than 100 steps, but it only matters in PvE, because in PvP even headshot damage from big distances is so pathetic that it doesn't matter if you can mark them with Painted Black or not. Anyway, so far, according to our tests, Evans Repeater was kinda fine. Not as good as Lancaster, but pretty close. But the last test changes it and shows that Evans Repeater is actually the worst choice, at least if we're talking about PvE. I'm talking about lock-on range, distance from which auto-aim works, obviously only if you're using controller, so for mouse and a keyboard users this parameter is not important, but for controller users it's important one. Anyway, all repeaters have pretty solid lock-on range, much higher than pistol or revolvers and just a little bit smaller than rifles. But for some reason Evans Repeater has a smaller lock-on range than other repeaters. Look, I had to make like 5 steps from Carbine Repeater lock-on range to reach Evans lock-on range. And on practice it's an extremely significant difference, because yeah, in PvP maybe it doesn't really matter because you don't want to fight using repeaters on such a big distances, but in PvE, when you fight in multiple enemies, in something like Call to Arms when you're trying to complete it solo, such difference will be extremely noticeable, because you want to kill your enemies as fast as possible and from as high distance as possible. So because of this lock-on range, I don't recommend Evans Repeater for PvE. On the other hand, Evans Repeater makes an extremely cool sound when you shoot, so if you're taking part in some less challenging PvE and care more about immersion, well, why not? But what about Litchfield Repeater for PvE, you might ask? It has highest damage and there is no damage reduction when you fight in NPCs, so maybe you can kill enemies with fewer body shots. Well, first of all, I have to repeat that making headshots is just much more effective way of fighting in Red Dead Online, so I guess you have to learn it. But if you don't want to and you want to focus on body shots because it's easier, Litchfield is still not much better, because on practice it will be same 2 body shots for most enemies as with any other repeater. Only against tougher enemies like in a 5-star bounty missions, it will take 1 less body shot with Litchfield Repeater than with other repeaters, but I mean it still will be like 3 body shots, and if you fight in tough enemies and spending so much time on body shots, you probably will get killed. So my conclusion is pretty simple: Lancaster is just the best choice for both PvP and PvE, and buying Litchfield or Evans Repeater is kind of a waste of money, because you're probably not gonna be using these weapons too much. And actually it's one of the mistakes that beginners are making, buying the wrong repeater. And if you want to find out about other mistakes that beginners are making, I suggest you to go and watch the video that you can see on your screen now. With that being said, stay safe, stay healthy, goodbye.